Have you ever noticed that there is a certain amount of money that makes you feel different? Maybe it's $100 in your wallet. Maybe it's $500 sitting in your checking account. Maybe it's $1,000 that you know you don't have to spend immediately. The strange part is that the money doesn't necessarily need to be enough to change your life. It simply needs to cross a certain psychological threshold. Below that number, you might feel cautious. You check your bank account more often. You think twice before ordering food. An unexpected bill suddenly feels like a serious problem. But once your balance rises above that invisible line, something changes. You breathe a little easier. You stop calculating every purchase. You walk into a store differently. You make decisions with less hesitation. You feel more capable. Sometimes, you even feel more confident around other people. And here's the interesting question. Why does money change how confident you feel when you haven't actually changed? You're still the same person. Your skills didn't suddenly improve. Your personality didn't change. Your intelligence didn't increase. The world didn't become completely safer. The only obvious difference is the number sitting inside your bank account. But psychologically, that number can represent something much bigger. It can represent room. Room to make mistakes. Room to deal with surprises. Room to say no. Room to wait. And most importantly, room to believe that one bad decision won't destroy everything. Imagine you have $40 left until payday. A $30 unexpected expense doesn't feel like a $30 problem. Psychologically, it can feel like a crisis. Because after paying it, you have only $10. Now imagine you have $4,000 in savings. The same $30 expense barely enters your mind. The price didn't change, but the meaning of the price did. This is one of the most important psychological differences between having money and having financial slack. Financial slack is the space between what you have and what you absolutely need. When that space is tiny, every decision feels dangerous. When that space becomes larger, the same decisions feel manageable. And this changes the way your brain experiences everyday life. When you don't have enough money, your attention can become occupied by scarcity. How much is left? How many days until payday? What bills are coming? What if the car breaks? What if something happens? The brain starts scanning for threats. But when you have a financial buffer, those questions become less urgent. The brain doesn't need to constantly monitor the environment. And that creates something surprisingly powerful: psychological freedom. You can think beyond today. You can consider next month. You can make plans. You can take a small risk. You can walk away from something you don't want. And this is where money starts influencing confidence. Because confidence isn't always about believing you're powerful. Sometimes, confidence is simply believing, I can handle what happens next. That's a very different feeling. Think about two people walking into the same room. Both are equally qualified. Both have similar intelligence. Both have the same experience. But one has $20 in their bank account and several overdue bills. The other has 6 months of expenses saved. They may behave completely differently. The first person might worry about losing their job. The second person may feel comfortable negotiating. The first may tolerate a situation they hate because they can't afford to leave. The second may feel comfortable saying no. Neither person necessarily has more courage. One simply has more financial room. And financial room can become psychological room. This is why having a certain amount of money can make you feel confident even when you're not consciously thinking about money. You don't need to spend it. You don't even need to touch it. Just knowing it's there can change the decisions you are willing to make. The money becomes a silent background signal. You're okay. You have options. You have time. And perhaps that's why the feeling can be so powerful. Because what you're really experiencing isn't confidence in money. You're experiencing confidence in your ability to survive uncertainty. And once you understand that, you can begin to see why the amount that makes you feel confident isn't necessarily the amount that makes you rich. It's the amount that gives your brain enough room to stop feeling trapped. So why does having a financial cushion create such a strong psychological effect? One reason is simple. Money gives you options, and options are psychologically powerful. Imagine you're unhappy at work. If you have no savings, the thought of quitting immediately creates another problem. Rent still needs to be paid. Food still needs to be purchased. Bills still arrive. So even if your job is making you miserable, you may feel trapped. Now imagine having enough savings to cover several months of basic expenses. Your job hasn't changed. Your boss hasn't changed. Your responsibilities haven't changed. but your perception of the situation has. You can leave. You can negotiate. You can search for another job. You can take your time. The money didn't necessarily make you more confident. It reduced the consequences of acting on your confidence. That's an important distinction. Sometimes what we call confidence is actually the feeling that we can afford the consequences of our decisions. This explains why people can behave completely differently depending on their financial position. Someone with no emergency savings may hesitate to challenge a manager. Someone with a substantial financial buffer may be more willing to say, "I don't agree with this." Someone living paycheck to paycheck may accept an unfair price because they can't afford another option. Someone with savings can walk away. Someone with debt may feel pressured to accept every opportunity. Someone with financial breathing room can choose carefully. The difference isn't necessarily personality. It's the size of the safety net underneath the personality. And there's another psychological effect. When you have very little money, every mistake becomes expensive. You accidentally miss a payment. Your car needs repairs. Your phone breaks. You get sick and miss work. Suddenly, a small event can become a financial emergency. This creates something psychologists might describe as a heightened sensitivity to potential threats. Your brain starts paying more attention to what could go wrong. And when your brain constantly expects something to go wrong, it becomes difficult to feel confident. You become cautious. You hesitate. You overthink. You calculate. You ask yourself, what if? What if I lose my job? What if the rent increases? What if the car breaks? What if I need money tomorrow? The problem isn't that these questions are irrational. Some of them are completely reasonable. The problem is when your brain never gets permission to stop asking them. Now imagine the opposite. You have money set aside specifically for emergencies. Your car breaks. It's annoying, but it's not catastrophic. You pay the repair bill. You don't need to borrow money. You don't need to panic. And after the problem is solved, your brain returns to normal. That difference is enormous. A financial cushion doesn't prevent bad things from happening. It changes how threatening those bad things feel. And that can affect confidence in ways you might never consciously notice. You might speak more freely. You might negotiate more aggressively. You might try something new. You might finally start the business you've been thinking about. You might leave a relationship that isn't healthy. You might say no to an opportunity that doesn't make sense. Not because money magically gave you courage, but because money reduced the fear of being trapped. This also explains something fascinating about wealth. People often assume that confidence comes from having expensive things: a luxury car, a designer watch, a huge house, an expensive vacation. But psychologically, those things may not provide the same security as money that simply sits untouched. Because the deepest psychological benefit of money isn't always consumption. It's optionality, the ability to choose, the ability to wait, the ability to absorb a mistake, the ability to walk away, the ability to say, "I don't have to accept this." And that sentence is incredibly powerful. Because when you don't have financial room, the world can feel like a series of obligations. You have to take the job. You have to accept the price. You have to keep the client. You have to work the extra hours. You have to say yes. But when you have enough financial room, some of those have-tos become choices. And choices create autonomy. Autonomy creates control. And control often feels like confidence. So perhaps the confidence you feel when your bank account reaches a certain number isn't really about the number itself. It's about what the number allows you to believe. I have options. I can handle surprises. I don't have to panic. I can take my time. And that psychological shift can be more valuable than the money itself. But there's one final question. If money creates confidence by providing security and options, then how much money do you actually need? And this is where things become surprisingly personal. Because there is no universal number. For one person, having $500 available might completely change how they feel. For another, $5,000 might not feel like enough. Someone with significant debt may feel anxious even with several $1,000s saved. Someone with very low monthly expenses may feel comfortable with much less. So the confidence threshold isn't simply a number. It's a relationship between money and uncertainty. The more uncertainty you face, the more financial room your brain may want. Think about it this way. If your essential expenses are $2,000 a month and you have $20,000 saved, that money represents roughly 10 months of basic expenses. That's psychological breathing room. But if your expenses are $8,000 a month, The same $20,000 represents only 2.5 months. Same money. Completely different psychological meaning. This is why comparing your financial situation with someone else's can be misleading. You might see someone with $50,000 saved and think, they must feel incredibly confident. But you don't know their obligations. You don't know their debt. You don't know their lifestyle. You don't know what they are responsible for. And more importantly, you don't know their personal threshold for feeling safe. Your brain doesn't necessarily ask, am I wealthy? It asks something much simpler. If something goes wrong, can I handle it? That's the question underneath financial confidence. And perhaps this gives us a better definition of financial security. It's not about having enough money to buy everything you want. It's about having enough financial room that one unexpected event doesn't immediately threaten your life. That changes how you interact with money. Instead of asking, how much can I spend? You start asking, how much freedom does this money give me? Instead of seeing savings as money you're refusing to enjoy, you start seeing it as stored flexibility. Every dollar you don't immediately spend can become a little piece of future freedom. An emergency fund isn't just cash, it's the ability to say no. Savings aren't just numbers on a screen, they're time, they're patience, they're the ability to wait for a better opportunity. And that's why the psychological effect of money can be so interesting. You may think you're trying to become richer, but underneath that goal, you may actually be trying to become less afraid of uncertainty. You want to know that if something goes wrong, you won't immediately fall apart. You want to know that you can survive a bad month. You want to know that losing one paycheck won't destroy everything. You want to know that you have enough room to make decisions based on what you actually want, rather than what you desperately need. And once you realize this, the goal of personal finance starts to look different. It isn't necessarily about maximizing your possessions. It isn't about constantly upgrading your lifestyle. It isn't even about reaching some arbitrary millionaire milestone. It may simply be about creating enough financial space that your brain doesn't have to operate in survival mode. Because when you have no room, every decision feels like a threat. When you have some room, decisions become choices. And when choices become possible, something changes inside you. You stand a little straighter. You negotiate a little more confidently. You worry a little less. You become more willing to wait. More willing to say no. More willing to take calculated risks. Not because you've suddenly become a different person, but because the consequences of uncertainty no longer feel quite as terrifying. And maybe that's why a certain amount of money can make you feel so confident. Not because money tells you that you're better than other people. Not because a bank balance determines your worth. But because, at some level, your brain interprets that financial cushion as a message. Whatever happens next, I have some room. And sometimes, that's all confidence really needs. Not certainty, not wealth. Just enough space to believe, I can handle what happens next.